Berlin, 1961. A city split overnight. Families torn apart. Lovers separated by concrete and barbed wire. But one man, Wolfgang Fuchs, refused to accept it. When his fiancée was trapped behind the Berlin Wall, he decided to dig, not just for her, but for freedom itself. Beneath the watchtowers and rifles, he built a secret tunnel that would change history forever. The morning of August 13th, 1961, began like any other in Berlin, until the sound of hammers and trucks shattered the calm. Overnight, East German troops, backed by the Soviets, had begun sealing off the border. Streets that once led freely into West Berlin were now lined with barbed wire, concrete barriers, and armed guards. What had been one city suddenly became two worlds, one free, one trapped behind an iron curtain. For Wolfgang Fuchs, a young engineering student living in West Berlin, the news came like a punch to the chest. His fiancée, Selina, lived in the east. The night before, they had spoken about visiting the lake the next weekend. Now she was gone, cut off by a wall of soldiers and steel. He tried to call her, but the phone lines were dead. Panic set in as he realized that she was now on the other side, in a country that had just turned its own borders into a prison. At first, Berliners were confused. Many thought the wall was temporary, a drastic measure that would soon come down. But within days, the temporary fences turned into permanent concrete. Checkpoints sprouted up, manned by grim-faced soldiers with shoot-to-kill orders. Train lines were cut, bridges were blocked, and guards patrolled every street that touched the border. Selina woke up that same morning to the sound of radio broadcasts echoing across East Berlin. The announcer declared that travel to the west was now forbidden. She rushed to the window and saw barbed wire stretching down the street, guarded by men with rifles. She tried to find a way through, desperate to reach Wolfgang, but every crossing was sealed. The world she knew had shrunk to a cage overnight. In the first few days, chaos ruled the border. People climbed over fences, sprinted through open lots, and jumped from buildings that straddled the divide. Some made it, others were caught or killed. The East German government called them traitors. The West called them heroes. For those trapped inside, it was simply despair. Wolfgang refused to sit and watch. He knew the risks, but he couldn't abandon her. Through whispered connections and sympathetic guards, he learned that some sections of the barbed wire were still poorly guarded. With the help of a few trusted friends, he devised a plan. One night, under the cover of rain, Selina crept toward the wire near Bernauer Strasse. On the other side, hidden behind the rubble, Wolfgang waited with a flashlight covered by cloth. The rain masked their footsteps and the whisper of cutting tools. Selina's heart pounded as she crawled through the narrow gap. For one terrifying moment, a spotlight swept nearby, but then moved on. Her coat snagged on the wire, tearing it, but Wolfgang grabbed her arm and pulled her through. The two of them fell into the mud, breathless and shaking, before running into the safety of the shadows. When they finally reached a safe house in West Berlin, they collapsed into each other's arms. For a brief moment, the wall didn't exist. Tears of relief turned into a vow. He had saved her once, but he couldn't stop there. Too many others were still trapped. Friends, classmates, ordinary people who just wanted to be free. That night, as they looked out toward the lights of East Berlin, Wolfgang made a silent promise. He would find a way to bring more people out, no matter how dangerous it was. The wall may have divided the city, but it could not divide his will. For him, this wasn't just about love anymore. It was about defying a system that had turned freedom into a crime. By 1962, the Berlin Wall had become a fortress. Concrete replaced barbed wire, guards were doubled, and anyone who dared to cross risked being shot on sight. The city was silent at night. No more rush of footsteps through dark alleys, no more whispers of escape. But inside a small apartment in West Berlin, Wolfgang Fuchs and a few trusted friends sat around a table, sketching plans that could have cost them their lives. Wolfgang couldn't shake the faces of those still trapped in the East. his classmates, neighbors, people who used to cross freely every day. They had done nothing wrong except being born on the wrong side of the wall. Every night, he looked across the border lights and thought about how close freedom was, just a few hundred meters away, and yet unreachable. That thought was unbearable. He started studying the city's underground systems, old sewer maps, gas tunnels, electrical routes, and basements. Berlin was a maze beneath its streets. Maybe, he thought, that's where the answer was hiding. One night, after hours of examining outdated blueprints, the idea struck him. If they can't go over, we'll go under. It sounded insane, but for men who had nothing left to lose, it was worth the risk. Wolfgang shared the idea with his close friend, Wolfgang Kockrow, another young Berliner who hated the East German regime. They both knew the dangers. The Stasi had informants everywhere. Even in West Berlin, spies lurked, listening for rumors of escape plots. A single word in the wrong ear could mean prison, or worse. Still, they began quietly gathering a small group of trusted people, students, laborers, and a few who had already escaped from the East. Everyone in the group had someone they wanted to save. Their first attempt came from a basement on the western side of Bernauer Strasse. With shovels, pickaxes, and bare hands, they began to dig. The soil was thick and damp, but they worked in shifts, whispering instructions under the noise of passing cars above. The first tunnel was only 30 meters long, but it stretched right into the cellar of a building in East Berlin. They worked for weeks, living on bread and coffee, sleeping on the cold floor. Every scrape of metal, every echo, could have given them away. And yet, miraculously, it worked. For a few brief days, families crawled through that narrow hole to freedom. Mothers with babies, students, and workers all risked everything to squeeze through. Each successful escape fueled Wolfgang's determination. But their luck didn't last. An East German border patrol discovered strange vibrations near one of the buildings. When they investigated, they found the tunnel. Soldiers poured in, sealed the entrance, and flooded it. The mission was over. Wolfgang and his team barely escaped arrest. The first tunnel was gone, but the dream wasn't. Failure only hardened him. If one tunnel could work once, another could work again, stronger, deeper, better hidden. This time, he would build one the East Germans could never find. By late 1963, Wolfgang had found the perfect spot, a small, empty bakery in West Berlin, marked for demolition. It was quiet, unguarded, and located dangerously close to the wall. He posed as a photographer and rented the basement, pretending to need it as a dark room. The real purpose, however, was far more dangerous. From that dim, dusty basement, Wolfgang and his men began to dig again. This time, their goal wasn't just to rescue a few, they wanted to save dozens. A tunnel long enough to outsmart the wall, and deep enough to beat the watchtowers. The plan was set. The mission had begun. And for Wolfgang Fuchs, there was no turning back. The bakery basement smelled of damp wood, rust, and secrecy. This was where it would happen. The second tunnel, the one that had to succeed. Wolfgang Fuchs stood under the dim glow of a single bulb, tracing his hand along the cold stone wall. He knew the risks, but he also knew the goal. A 145-meter passage stretching from West Berlin into the heart of East Berlin, deep beneath the wall that had divided lives and crushed hope. Every sound above could be a death sentence. East German guards patrolled with dogs and spotlights just meters away. One mistake, one careless word, and the Stasi would storm in. To keep the mission safe, Wolfgang enforced a rule. Only those who had family trapped in the East could be part of the team. That way, everyone had something personal at stake, and no one would betray them. They worked in shifts, day and night. The first days were the hardest. The soil was unstable and heavy, collapsing whenever they dug too wide. Every meter forward was a victory. The tunnel had to slope down more than 12 meters before running flat under the border. Without professional tools, everything was improvised. Lumber to support the walls had to be smuggled in under the noses of guards. Ventilation was built from old pipes and fans stolen from junkyards. Even light was a luxury, bare bulbs connected by a tangle of wires. As they dug deeper, the heat and suffocation became unbearable. The air grew so thin that it would extinguish their candles. One man nearly passed out before they installed the handmade exhaust system. Yet, no one gave up. They joked, sweated, and prayed in the dark, their hands blistered, their clothes soaked with mud. It was exhausting, but the thought of the people waiting on the other side kept them moving. Selina became their quiet guardian. Each day she brought food disguised as romantic picnic baskets. She and Wolfgang would walk through the streets pretending to be lovers, laughing and holding hands. To the guards, they looked harmless. To the team, she was a lifeline. Her courage was the kind that never made headlines but saved lives nonetheless. Weeks turned into months. The pile of dirt inside the bakery grew so large it filled half the basement. They couldn't risk taking it out. It might alert someone. So they packed it into sacks, spreading it under floorboards and behind fake walls. Every solution was born of desperation. After 5 long months, the tunnel stretched to more than 100 meters. Progress slowed as the soil changed. Hard clay mixed with old building foundations. Wolfgang knew they were close. Then, one night, as he struck his shovel into the ground, he hit something solid. Metal. It was a drainage pipe, old, but still intact. Excitement rippled through the team. They followed it, inch by inch, until the ground above thinned. On the other side of that wall was an abandoned outhouse in East Berlin. Dusty, silent, forgotten. It was perfect. Still, danger lurked. Before breaking through completely, Wolfgang tested it with a dummy to make sure no guards were waiting. Hours passed. Nothing. The silence told them everything. They had done it. When Wolfgang finally crawled into that cold, empty space, he realized what it meant. A bridge between two worlds, carved by hand in the shadows. The tunnel was ready. After months of fear, sweat, and secrecy, they now had a passage to freedom. The message spread quietly through coded telegrams and whispers. Friends, families, lovers, people who had waited years for hope, were told to be ready. The first journey through the tunnel would begin soon, and on that night, the dream of freedom would rise from beneath the earth. The night of the escape was cold, damp, and silent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes your heart sound like thunder. Wolfgang Fuchs crouched at the tunnel entrance beneath the bakery, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. This was the moment they had been working toward for months. The night when families would finally crawl through the darkness and into freedom. Each person had been carefully selected. They were mothers, fathers, lovers, and children. People with no weapons, no maps, and nothing but trust in the strangers who had built their salvation beneath the ground. Selina, her face pale but resolute, stood beside Wolfgang, checking the last of the ropes and air pipes. "Once they start coming, we don't stop," she whispered. He nodded. The plan was simple. Small groups, 10 at a time, crawling through the narrow 145-meter tunnel, guided only by the light of small lanterns spaced along the path. At exactly 11:15 p.m., the first group entered. They moved slowly, crawling on their elbows, the rough earth scraping their skin. The sound of shuffling and whispered prayers echoed faintly through the tunnel. In West Berlin, Wolfgang waited at the exit, counting seconds between breaths. When the first figure emerged, a woman clutching her child, tears filled his eyes. She was trembling, gasping for air, but she was free. He reached for her hand and whispered, "You made it." But the joy was brief. The second group took longer than expected. The soil was damp, causing parts of the tunnel to sag. A small section near the middle started to collapse, filling the passage with dust and panic. Wolfgang grabbed a rope and crawled halfway in, calling out names. His voice echoed back through the darkness until he heard faint responses. They were alive, just trapped. With raw strength, he pulled them forward one by one, his hands bleeding as the wood supports cracked above him. By dawn, 29 people had escaped successfully. Each face that emerged told a story. A mother reunited with her husband, a student who hadn't seen his brother in years, a young girl carrying her grandmother's locket. But every success made the risk grow. The tunnel's vibrations, the whisper of rumors in East Berlin. Something was bound to reach the Stasi. And it did. At sunrise, as Wolfgang prepared to guide the final group, Selina burst through the bakery door. "The border guards know," she hissed, her voice shaking. "They're coming!" Within minutes, the streets outside filled with the sound of boots and barking dogs. Wolfgang's mind raced. The tunnel couldn't be sealed now. There were still people waiting on the other side. In those final, desperate moments, Wolfgang made his choice. He ordered the last few to crawl through while he stayed behind, buying time. He smashed the tunnel's outer entrance, breaking the supports so it would collapse once they were through. Dust filled the air, choking him as he yelled, "Go! Don't stop!" As the final escapees emerged safely into the west, the east side of the tunnel caved in completely, just as the Stasi arrived. They found nothing but broken earth and silence. Wolfgang and Selina fled the bakery moments before the soldiers broke down the door. Running through the narrow streets of Berlin, with sirens echoing and spotlights sweeping across the walls, they didn't know if they'd make it out alive. But as the city began to wake, the news spread like wildfire. 29 souls had escaped through the ground. It wasn't just a tunnel anymore. It was a legend, a story whispered through generations about the night when ordinary people defied an empire and dug their way to freedom. Wolfgang and Selina didn't stop running until the city disappeared behind them. Dawn had broken over Berlin, painting the ruins gold and gray. The wall loomed in the distance like a scar across the earth, silent, brutal, and eternal. But somewhere beneath it, their tunnel still lay, buried, broken, and victorious. 29 people had made it through. For a few precious hours, freedom had won. But freedom always comes with a price. The Stasi launched a manhunt within hours. Every informer, every checkpoint, every whisper on the street, all pointed to one thing. Someone had built an underground escape route. They interrogated families, tortured workers, and raided abandoned shops. They found traces of wood, mud, and wire, but no proof. The tunnel had collapsed before they could document it, and that made Wolfgang's story even more dangerous. To the East German authorities, he wasn't a hero. He was a traitor. In West Berlin, however, his name began to circulate in secret circles. Journalists, students, even American television networks wanted to know who had pulled off the impossible. When an NBC crew approached him, Wolfgang hesitated. He wasn't in it for fame. He only wanted people to remember that courage had existed beneath the ground. Eventually, he agreed, allowing them to document a second tunnel project, which later became known as Tunnel 29, one of the most daring operations in Cold War history. Yet, fame brought danger. The Stasi planted spies in the West, pretending to be refugees, hoping to catch the new tunnelers. Wolfgang's circle tightened. He trusted only Selina and a few close allies. Nights became sleepless, filled with the sounds of trains, footsteps, and the paranoia that someone was watching. Still, he kept digging. He couldn't stop. To him, every person still trapped behind that wall was a reason to keep going. Selina saw what it was doing to him, the toll it took on his body and mind. You already gave them hope, she told him one night as they sat beside the dark river dividing east and west. You don't have to lose yourself to it. Wolfgang looked across the water, where searchlights swept the night sky. If I stop, he said softly, then the wall wins. That was who he was, not a soldier, not a politician, just a man who refused to let concrete define humanity. Years passed. The tunnels became legend, whispered stories told in safe houses and classrooms. Many who escaped built new lives, engineers, teachers, doctors, all carrying the memory of that dark crawl toward the light. Wolfgang never sought recognition. He stayed out of the spotlight, quietly helping others escape when he could, until one day, he simply vanished. Some said he fled after being targeted by the Stasi. Others believed he died in another tunnel, digging until the end. No one knows for sure. But in 1989, when the Berlin Wall finally fell, people gathered where the barrier once stood. They sang, cried, and embraced strangers. East and West united at last. In the chaos, someone placed a single photograph at the foot of the crumbling wall. A young man and woman, covered in dirt, smiling faintly under a flickering light. On the back, 3 words were written in faded ink. We made it through. That picture became a symbol, not just of one man's bravery, but of everyone who dared to believe that walls could be broken. Wolfgang Fuchs' tunnels weren't just escape routes. They were proof that even in the darkest corners of history, the human spirit can dig its way to the light. And though the tunnels have long since collapsed, the courage behind them still echoes beneath Berlin. A whisper reminding the world that freedom, no matter how deep you bury it, always finds a way out.